Imagine walking around one day and suddenly seeing the ground under your feet simply plummeting towards certain death, taking entire buildings with it. They're called landslides, and we made a compilation of the most terrifying that have ever been seen. From the deadliest landslide in history to the biggest one in history, here are 15 massive landslides caught on camera. Number 15. Landslide buries cars and cuts highway in Taiwan. A landslide in Taiwan partially buried a three-way highway and crushed 3 cars as it descended down upon them. A firefighter reported that the amount of rubble found at the site could have filled 2 soccer stadiums to the brim. It was like an entire whole new mountain grew suddenly on top of the motorway like an overnight mushroom sprout. It took hundreds of workers to dig around the clock with the help of bulldozers to try to locate the cars that got trapped underneath, and hopefully find the passengers alive. It was believed to be 4 people in total. The landslide wasn't caused by any sudden changes in weather, but it's believed to be rather a progressive failure over time. But in that case, some people argue that the signs should have been observed and reported before tragedy struck. Truth is, Taiwan has a real landslide problem, and lots of them are dangerously near major roads. At the time of this landslide, the Ministry of Transportation was investigating 20 other similar ones around the area. So there you have it. If you ever go visit Taiwan, whatever you do, stay away from the roads. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell right now, or this centipede will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. Number 14. Landslide kills at least 162 people in Myanmar's jade mining hub. Myanmar is the world's biggest source of jade, but the industry presents many issues. Most jade mines are government-owned, but they severely lack security measures, and they also employ illegal workers that scavenge for rocks that might have been left behind by the big machines. So they scavenge the leftover rubble in search of little pieces of jade in order to provide for their families. But jade mines are notoriously dangerous, and when a tragedy strikes, illegal miners are the most vulnerable. And that was the case of the terrible landslide that occurred on July 2020. The mine is located in a very steep hillside 300 feet high, and there's a muddy lake below. So when the massive landslide began, it dropped huge amounts of rock and debris into the water, creating a ferocious 20-foot high shockwave that managed to drown lots of workers that were at the edge of the lake. The landslide itself also took the lives of many more workers that were scavenging at the mine. 54 people were gravely injured and rushed to the hospital, and 168 bodies were recovered in total, but there's no way of knowing how many more there are buried under the mud. Number 13. Alaska has the most earthquakes in the US. Alaska is a land of extremes. Extreme weather conditions, extreme wildlife, extreme geography, and extreme cataclysmic natural forces. The earthquakes can reshape mountain ranges in seconds. Not only do they have 100 quakes a day on average, but some of them are the most powerful ever recorded on the entire planet. But none like the 1964 Anchorage quake. It had the power of 63,000 atomic bombs. It was so colossal, it was impossible to comprehend. It scored a 9.2 on the Richter scale, making it the second largest in world history. It was so massive, it managed to move an area of 450 miles long and 150 miles wide by 30 feet, and it did it in only 5 minutes. This quake even changed the coastline so radically that the maps had to be redrawn. It literally changed the face of the Earth. But the funny thing about quakes is that they never come alone. If they have their epicenter in the ocean like this one, you can expect massive tsunami waves to hit right after. And when I say massive, I mean big enough to absolutely devastate southern Alaska and even reach the coasts of Hawaii and California. So this earthquake was so unimaginably huge, it killed over 130 people from Alaska to California. Number 12. Mount St. Helens Volcano, 1980. The Mount St. Helens volcano explosion in 1980 was one of the strongest in the world's history. It was 500 times more powerful than the first atomic bomb. St. Helens volcano is relatively very young as volcanoes go, but like any child, it is still super active and it likes to act out. In the last 500 years, this volcano has been the most regularly and violently active in the world. It's not for nothing that the local tribes call it the Keeper of Fire. And in 1980, it went overboard, causing the largest landslide ever recorded in history. The blast could be heard hundreds of miles away, and the explosion removed 1,300 feet off the top of the volcano. The ash cloud that was released was spat all throughout the globe. It made entire woods disappear and melted all the ice surrounding it in just a few seconds. The volcanic eruption wiped out 370 square miles of land at the blink of an eye. Just try to imagine the sheer power necessary to do that. And it was all natural causes. Nobody had ever seen anything like it, and unfortunately, 57 people were killed during the incident. It was such an unprecedented event, it shaped modern volcanology as we know it today. Number 11. Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan. Pakistan was hit by several massive consecutive landslides in Gilgit-Baltistan, and they were so powerful they literally created a river of gray mud and massive rocks. It was almost like something out of a video game. The terrifying river of death destroyed everything in its path, people and property alike. Just imagine the power of such a thing. And the landslides didn't stop happening for days. It was one after the other, making it impossible for the local people to catch a break. It was terrifying. As a consequence of the landslides, major floods were also reported, and unfortunately, 5 people lost their lives during the incident. Local agencies reported at least 9 landslides in the area. That is 9 too many. Apparently, such an unusual natural phenomenon occurred because temperatures rose 5 degrees above normal, causing the ice at the top of the mountains to melt. As the liquefied ice was descending the mountainside, it started an unstoppable series of landslides all over the area that destroyed everything it could. Unfortunately, landslides are a current occurrence in Pakistan, and on average, 100 people die every year as a consequence. Number 10. Sierra Leone landslide. In the West African country of Sierra Leone, a massive mudslide was reported in August 2017. Torrential rain brought down an entire mountain slide and unfortunately buried people under the rubble and also drowning others in the mud. The incident happened not too far from Freetown, the capital city. Massive efforts were made to rescue people, but it was an uphill battle given the weather conditions continuing to worsen. The brown, muddy waters filled the streets of the city, leaving hundreds at peril of losing their lives. The Red Cross reported 600 people missing and 300 people were found tragically dead, as more bodies continue to be found washing up on the beach. It was a terrible accident and the whole ordeal happened in only a few seconds. The deadly mudslides were caused by an unusual amount of rain in the area, 20 inches more than normal, officials said. But the tragedy didn't just take people's lives, it also destroyed a major part of the city, taking away the few possessions that people had and making it very hard for the survivors to start over. It was truly a heartbreaking event and took the city a very long time to start its recovery. Number 9. China's massive landslide. This landslide is one of the very few ones created by a man-made structure. Just outside the city of Shenzhen, a construction company decided to drop a huge mountain of debris, completely ignoring the dangers it could pose for the citizens nearby. And eventually, the 380,000 square meter mountain of construction waste started to crumble, completely burying one of the most populated cities in China. The event could have been perfectly prevented if only the company had dropped their waste somewhere safe and regulated. But the corruption in the country of China is so endemic, accidents like this one often occur with complete disregard for human life. In the aftermath, the wave of mud crushed down 33 buildings and trapped everybody that was unable to flee the site on time. It was even reported that the dumping ground was ordered to close because of security reasons, but workers said that the company forced them to keep dropping their debris there. The sheer negligence seen in Chinese officials was the cause of more than 100 deaths, and the neighbors are understandably enraged about it. Number 8. Heavy landslide in La Paz, Bolivia. La Paz is the highest capital city in the world, and many buildings there are built on steep slopes, which makes them vulnerable to landslides. On April 30th, 2019, a terrible landslide buried an entire neighborhood and destroyed as many as 66 residences, leaving 88 families homeless. La Paz, being 3.640 meters above sea level, suffers from very extreme weather, and when it rains excessively, it can cause disastrous landslides that can be extremely deadly, and this one was no exception. It took entire buildings down the hill, and as you can imagine, they were completely turned to dust. People were seen fleeing, holding onto their young ones and their pets, and to the few possessions they had the time to salvage from their homes. It was a devastating scene. The people of that neighborhood are mostly people that have very little economic resources, and the little they had was taken away from them before their eyes. It was heartbreaking. The military and firefighters were deployed immediately to rescue the people who had been buried under the rubble, but the weather got worse and the diggings couldn't go on. But fortunately and miraculously, there were no casualties reported, although one person got gravely injured. Number 7. Massive landslide in Italy. Massive landslides occurred in Calabria, Italy. They were caused by torrential rain. 2,300 villagers had to be evacuated immediately since the mudslides were hitting the area one after the other overnight. And over 300 people had to be placed in improvised shelters in gymnasiums and a police school. Just imagine the sheer terror of being woken up in the middle of the night by your house literally being swept away down the hill. Locals have blamed the terrible tragedy on the unplanned construction of buildings on areas in danger of mudslides. The construction did not comply with any security measures, and the company that did them was very well aware of the potential deadly danger. In the aftermath of such a horrible night, the damage is estimated to be in the tens of millions of euros. Entire buildings were engulfed by the several landslides. The power of destruction of one single mudslide is enormous, but of a cluster of them, it becomes surrealistically impossible to manage, especially when they occur in such a short time and so close together geographically. It was like a biblical scene of the end of the world, and nothing that's happened has compared to it ever since. Number 6. Big Sur, California. The iconic California Highway 1 that snakes along the coastal cliffs has been completely destroyed because of a terrible landslide, all 23 miles of it. Torrential rains caused a massive 150-foot hole on the side of the mountain, taking a huge chunk of the motorway with it. It almost looks like a giant decided to take a bite, leaving a gaping hole behind. But the culprit wasn't a giant. The chunk of mountain just simply fell off towards the ocean below, taking with it chunks of cement and a slice of the asphalt of the road as well. The landslides were caused by severe winter rains. Some people say that since the construction of the scenic road, it has never been fully functional north to south for more than 1 year at a time. And that is because of the extreme constant danger of landslides all over the area it was built. And with its steep slopes, crumbling cliff sides, and rising tides, it makes for a very unsafe environment. So much so that over the years, millions of dollars have been poured into the reparation of the road and its surroundings. So if you ever visit California and you want the iconic picture of the sunset, think twice where you stop your car, and if the ground starts moving, run for your life. Number 5. Thistle, Utah. Landslides can be extremely destructive, but when they manage to obliterate an entire town, well, that's something out of a doomsday tale. And that is exactly what happened in Utah County in 1983, when the citizens of the town named Thistle saw their homes being turned to dust before their very eyes. The first signs of the landslide were noticed by railroad workers when they noticed that the railroad tracks were moving by several inches over a few days, and then they noticed the highway started to buckle. But it was too late. The town's fate was sealed already, and only a couple of days after the first signs, hell rained down on Thistle. The slide was moving too fast to even try to keep up with it, and residents were ordered to evacuate immediately. The slide managed to completely block the river nearby and buried the entire unfortunate town. Eventually, the railroad and the highway opened again away from the slide, but the town of Thistle was never salvaged. It remains lost, forever buried. Just like the city of Atlanta, only this time it was dirt instead of water. The incident cost the state of Utah $200 million in total. Number 4. Sri Lanka landslide. More than 200 people were buried under the mud after a horrific landslide happened in Sri Lanka. Locals say the noise was so strong it seemed like a monster was eating away at the earth, compassed with terrifying thunder and lightning strikes. It destroyed 3 villages and a huge chunk of the forest, creating a pathway of destruction. This landslide was so massively big it affected 22 of the 25 states in the country. That is the majority of the territory devastated in one single strike. An estimated 301,602 people were gravely affected in total. Thousands of houses were destroyed. The authorities couldn't get to the rescue of the people still caught up on the mud because of a high risk of creating even more landslides. It was absolute terror. In the aftermath, 30,000 houses needed to be rebuilt and another 128,000 were affected. This is not your ordinary landslide. This is Armageddon. Just imagine the sheer power it takes to decimate such a big chunk of an entire country just like that. Our thoughts go out to the people of Sri Lanka that were affected by this terrible tragedy. Number 3. Pangi village of Himachal Pradesh, India. Some landslides are bigger than others, but they're all extremely dangerous, and as little as they might be, you should always be aware that it only takes a bad move for you to potentially lose your life. Most landslides are not very magnificent, but that doesn't mean you should approach them, like the Pangi Valley landslide in India. At first, it was only a couple of little boulders being ejected from the mountainside, but that means that the grounds are not stable, and if a person would have been there on top of that hill, they would have plummeted to their death down into the valley below. When the ground is not strong enough to hold onto a little boulder, it isn't strong enough to fight back against gravity, and unfortunately, when that happens, accidents can occur. So next time you feel the dirt moving under your feet, be aware of the possibility of a landslide and run towards the area that seems to be stable and not moving, even if you have to make a decision in a split second. Number 2. Vargas tragedy, Venezuela. Tragedy struck Venezuela after a series of floods and landslides, making it one of the most terrible natural disasters to have ever happened in Latin America. The tragedy happened on December the 16th, 1999, and killed up to 30,000 people. It was estimated that more than 500,000 people were gravely affected by the phenomenon. 26,000 homes were turned to dust, and 80,000 were extremely damaged all throughout the country. Unfortunately, when something like this happens in a country with little resources, the real damage is immeasurable, and it takes the affected citizens years to recover. It's a true tragedy. The coastal region named Vargas was completely unrecognizable, destroyed to oblivion. Even officials were heartbroken because there was little they could do to help the newly homeless population. There were simply too many, and the money was too scarce. 3 years into the incident, and people are still struggling with the memory and with the new surroundings they had to adapt to. It was one of the biggest landslides that the continent had ever seen, and it rushed down from the ravines so incredibly quickly that the people couldn't run away to safety on time. Let's hope something like that never happens again anywhere in the world. Number 1. Brazil landslide. A series of floods and landslides struck a region near Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, causing more than 14,000 people to become suddenly homeless. It was the deadliest the country had ever seen. It killed at least 800 people, and hundreds more remained missing for days after the incident. Not only was it the worst flood and landslide event, but also the worst natural disaster in Brazil's history. It happened in the Cerrado mountain region, and the landscape was unrecognizable afterwards. The event destroyed buildings, roads, and much more in just one strike, affecting thousands of people in a very serious manner. Entire chunks of mountain fell upon towns and villages, leaving no refuge for the people residing in them. It was sheer terror all around. And then the floods hit, drowning everything and everyone in its path. In some places, only the house's roofs could be seen from the helicopter, and in the aftermath, the mud sediments were so high that the cars remained buried under them. Lines of coffins could be seen at the cemeteries nearby, not being able to accommodate for such a rush of dead bodies. It was a truly cataclysmic event that changed the region forever. I don't know about you, but I had no idea that landslides could be so horrifically scary. But as you can see, they are as destructive and terrifying as tornadoes or earthquakes. What about you? Had you ever had the misfortune of seeing one in action? Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on screen right now. See you next time.